The sky pillars of Zittrion rose like majestic spires, piercing the atmosphere and disappearing into the dense pink clouds that cloaked the planet's upper layers. These structures, formed by the natural forces of Zittrion's unique magnetic fields, stood as a testament to nature's might and beauty. Smooth and reflective, their surfaces shimmered in the light of the twin suns, creating a mesmerizing display that captivated visitors from across the galaxy. But beneath their beauty lay a challenge that no species had been able to conquer. For centuries, the sky pillars had been the subject of fascination, scientific study, and countless failed attempts at ascension. The Zytranians, the dominant species on the planet, had tried every method imaginable to scale the colossal formations. They had engineered magnetic repulsion suits, deployed advanced climbing drones, and even attempted to use organic adhesives derived from their planet's flora. Every attempt ended in failure. The pillars seemed to mock their efforts, as though they were a puzzle meant to remain unsolved. Professor Zix was one of the most respected scientists on Zittrion. His emerald skin and elongated head marked him as a being of wisdom and intellect, a status he had earned through decades of groundbreaking research. He had spent most of his life studying the sky pillars, writing volumes of data about their composition, magnetic properties, and structural integrity. Zix had become the leading voice on the topic, and his conclusion was as definitive as it was disheartening. No species, not even humans, can climb the sky pillars. The professor's statement was not made lightly. He had presented his findings at the annual Intergalactic Summit, a gathering of the brightest minds from dozens of advanced civilizations. The summit was held on Zittrion that year, with the sky pillars themselves serving as a stunning backdrop to the event. Representatives from various species, humans included, sat in the massive amphitheater, their attention fixed on Zittrion as he delivered his keynote address. Through centuries of study, Zix declared, his deep, resonant voice filling the hall, we have determined that the sky pillars are a natural anomaly that defies all conventional methods of traversal. Their magnetic surfaces reject any foreign material. Their composition is too smooth for even microscopic adhesion, and their height renders even our most advanced aerial technology useless. The pillars are, quite simply, insurmountable. The audience erupted into polite applause, though the humans in attendance exchanged skeptical glances. Among them was Dr. Eliza Watkins, a scientist from Earth known for her unconventional approach to problem-solving. Eliza was seated near the back of the amphitheater, her sharp eyes narrowing as she listened to Zix's confident proclamations. She had arrived on Zittrion with an open mind, eager to learn from one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. But now, as she observed the smug satisfaction on Zix's face, she felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. Eliza was no stranger to challenges. She had grown up in a small, rural town on Earth where resources were scarce and ingenuity was a necessity. Her passion for science had driven her to earn multiple degrees in engineering and physics, and her work on Earth's space exploration programs had earned her a reputation as a problem solver who thrived under pressure. When she had been invited to attend the Intergalactic Summit, she had seen it as an opportunity to exchange ideas and collaborate with some of the galaxy's greatest minds. She hadn't expected to be told that something was impossible. As Zix concluded his speech, Eliza raised her hand. The gesture drew attention from those seated around her, and a murmur spread through the audience. Zix paused, his expression shifting to one of mild annoyance. "Yes, the human in the back," he said, his tone courteous but dismissive. Eliza stood, her voice steady as she addressed the professor. "With all due respect, Professor Zix, isn't it a bit premature to declare the sky pillars unclimbable? Surely there are approaches that haven't been explored yet." The amphitheater fell silent, the tension palpable. Zix tilted his head, his large, luminous eyes studying Eliza with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Dr. Watkins," he replied, his voice measured. "But I assure you, every conceivable method has been tested. Unless humans have discovered some groundbreaking technology that the rest of us are unaware of, The pillars will remain an enigma. Eliza didn't back down. Perhaps it's not about groundbreaking technology, she said. Sometimes the answer lies in simplicity and adaptability. With the right tools and a fresh perspective, I believe it's possible to scale the sky pillars. The room buzzed with whispers, the other delegates clearly intrigued by the exchange. Zix, however, remained unimpressed. If you believe you can succeed where countless others have failed, Dr. Watkins, you are welcome to try. But I warn you, the pillars are not kind to overconfidence. Eliza's lips curved into a determined smile. Challenge accepted. After the summit, Eliza wasted no time. She secured permission from the Zitrionian authorities to conduct her research on the sky pillars, a request they granted with a mix of amusement and skepticism. She set up a small lab at the base of the tallest pillar, its shadow stretching for miles across the arid landscape. The pillar's surface gleamed in the sunlight, a silent reminder of the daunting task ahead. Eliza began by studying the magnetic properties of the pillars, analyzing data from previous failed attempts, and conducting her own experiments. She worked tirelessly, her mind racing with ideas as she sketched prototypes and tested materials. The locals watched her efforts with a mix of curiosity and disbelief, their laughter echoing across the plains whenever one of her tests ended in failure. But Eliza was undeterred. She knew that innovation required persistence, and she was determined to prove Zix wrong. Every setback was a lesson, every failure a stepping stone toward success. As she stood at the base of the sky pillar, staring up at its impossible height, she felt a surge of determination. She would climb the unclimbable. She would do what no one else had done. And she would show the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to rise to any challenge. Eliza Watkins woke early the next morning, her mind already racing with ideas as she stood at the edge of her temporary lab. The structure was minimal, constructed quickly after her approval to work at the sky pillars. It had all the essentials she needed: a workspace with advanced tools borrowed from Earth's research programs, a scanner to analyze the unique magnetic properties of the pillars, and a set of storage compartments filled with materials she thought might be useful. Outside, the twin suns of Zytrion had barely risen, casting a faint orange glow over the barren landscape. She sipped a bitter Zytronian tea, its sharp metallic taste something she was still trying to get used to, and reviewed the data she had collected the day before. The magnetic field surrounding the pillars was far stronger than she had anticipated. It wasn't just the smoothness of the surface that made climbing impossible. It was the constant push and pull of invisible forces that repelled anything metallic or conductive. Even the lightest material capable of adhering to the surface was rejected violently, as if the pillar itself were alive and determined to remain untouched. Eliza ran her fingers through her short dark hair, frustration evident on her face. "All right," she muttered to herself, pacing in front of her workbench. "If the surface won't let anything stick, I need to stop thinking about climbing in the traditional sense. This isn't about grabbing onto something. It's about neutralizing the forces at play." Her gaze shifted to the sketches she had drawn the night before, scattered across the table. Most of them depicted standard climbing mechanisms: hooks, adhesive gloves, mechanical legs designed for traction. None of them accounted for the magnetic interference, which had rendered all previous attempts useless. She sighed, brushing the sketches aside. "No, this isn't going to work," she murmured, leaning against the workbench. "I need something completely different." Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint hum of a transport vehicle approaching in the distance. Turning, she spotted a small Zytribian hovercraft gliding over the rocky terrain. The craft came to a halt near her lab, and Professor Zrix stepped out, his tall, slender frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. His presence was both unexpected and unwelcome, but Eliza forced a polite smile as he approached. "Dr. Watkins," Zix began, his voice as calm and measured as ever, "I came to see how you're progressing. I must admit, I'm curious to see what a human mind can achieve against such insurmountable odds." Eliza folded her arms, her expression neutral. "I'm making progress," she said simply. unwilling to divulge any details to the man who had so publicly doubted her abilities. "It's a challenge, but I've never been one to shy away from those." Zeux's large, luminous eyes studied her intently. "I admire your determination," he said, though there was a hint of condescension in his tone. "But determination alone will not solve this puzzle. The Sky Pillars have defeated far more advanced civilizations than your own." "Good thing I'm not relying on determination alone," Eliza replied, her voice steady. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Zix inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her dismissal. "Very well," he said, "but do remember, Dr. Watkins, there is no shame in admitting defeat. Sometimes the wisest course of action is to recognize the limits of one's capabilities." With that, he turned and returned to his hovercraft, leaving Eliza standing at the edge of her lab, her hands clenched into fists. She watched as the craft disappeared into the distance, her frustration boiling over. "Limits of one's capabilities," she muttered under her breath. "I'll show you limits." She turned back to her workbench, her mind racing with renewed determination. If the magnetic field was the primary obstacle, then the solution lay in neutralizing or counteracting it. She began sketching a new design, one that focused not on adhering to the surface, but on creating a stable field around her that would allow her to move freely up the pillar. The idea was ambitious. She would essentially be building a pair of boots that could generate a localized anti-magnetic field, strong enough to counteract the forces of the Sky Pillars without interfering with her ability to climb. The first step was to calculate the strength of the field she needed. She ran simulations on her scanner, inputting the data she had collected and adjusting variables to account for the intensity of the magnetic waves. The results were daunting. The field would need to be incredibly precise, calibrated to the unique frequency of the pillar's magnetism. Any miscalculation could result in a catastrophic failure, or worse, a violent rejection from the surface that could send her plummeting to her death. Undeterred, Eliza began assembling a prototype. She worked late into the night, her fingers deftly assembling the intricate components of the boots. The design incorporated materials that were lightweight yet durable, capable of withstanding the extreme forces she would encounter. At the heart of each boot was a small but powerful generator, designed to emit the anti-magnetic field she needed. It was a delicate balance. Too strong, and the field would disrupt her movements. Too weak, and the magnetic interference would overpower her. By the time she finished the first prototype, the twin moons of Zytrion had risen, casting a silvery light over her lab. Exhausted but satisfied, Eliza set the boots on the workbench and stepped back to admire her work. They were sleek and minimal, a testament to her ability to combine functionality with simplicity. But the real test lay ahead. She spent the next few days running tests, fine-tuning the boots and ensuring they performed as expected. She simulated various climbing scenarios, using a smaller magnetic structure she had built to mimic the properties of the Sky Pillars. The results were promising, but she knew that nothing could truly replicate the conditions she would face on the real thing. As she prepared for her first attempt, Eliza couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had poured everything into this project, her skills, her knowledge, her determination. The thought of failure was daunting, but she refused to let it deter her. She glanced up at the towering sky pillar, its surface gleaming in the moonlight. It was a formidable adversary, but she was ready to face it. Eliza took a deep breath and tightened the straps on her boots. The time for planning and preparation was over. The time for action had arrived. The morning was crisp, with the twin suns casting their golden light across the arid expanse of Zytrion. Eliza Watkins stood at the base of the tallest sky pillar, her gaze fixed on the impossible height above her. She was suited up and ready. The gravity boots, her invention, born of relentless effort and countless calculations, were strapped firmly to her feet. Every inch of her attire was tailored for this moment. Lightweight, heat-resistant, and durable enough to withstand the potential dangers of the climb. Her heart raced, a mixture of excitement and dread coursing through her veins. A small crowd of Zytrionians had gathered at a safe distance to watch her attempt. Most of them wore skeptical expressions, their elongated faces betraying both curiosity and the expectation of failure. Among them was Professor Zrix, who stood with his arms crossed, his glowing green eyes fixed on Eliza. He had come to witness what he was certain would be yet another futile effort, but he made no comment. His silent judgment was enough. Eliza double-checked the settings on the control panel embedded into her gloves. The anti-magnetic field generator in her boots hummed softly, its power calibrated precisely to neutralize the disruptive forces of the pillar. She had tested it repeatedly in the lab, fine-tuning every parameter, but this was the first time it would be subjected to the full power of the sky pillar's magnetic field. There was no room for error. Taking a deep breath, she placed her right foot on the pillar. The surface was impossibly smooth, its metallic sheen reflecting her determined face back at her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the boots engaged, anchoring her foot securely to the pillar with an almost imperceptible hum. She tested her balance, shifting her weight carefully before lifting her left foot and repeating the process. For the moment, the hands and feet under her reached a hum, and to her relief, the boots held steady. The first few meters of the climb were slow but steady. With each step, Eliza gained a little more confidence, her movements becoming smoother and more deliberate. The crowd below murmured among themselves, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. She didn't need to look back to know they were surprised, perhaps even impressed, but she wasn't climbing for them. This was her challenge, her moment to prove that human ingenuity could overcome even the most insurmountable obstacles. As she ascended, the wind began to pick up, whipping around her and causing her to tighten her grip on the small handholds she had added to her suit. The sky pillar's height amplified the gusts, making them feel almost like living entities trying to push her off the structure. She activated the stabilizers in her boots, which adjusted automatically to keep her balanced. It worked, but the effort of maintaining her climb was beginning to take its toll. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her arms ached from the strain. About 100 meters up, the first signs of trouble appeared. The magnetic interference from the pillar grew stronger, more chaotic, as if reacting to her presence. Her boots, designed to counteract the field, began to struggle. She could feel the vibrations through her legs, a warning that the system was being pushed to its limits. She paused, clinging to the pillar and adjusting the settings on her gloves, trying to stabilize the field. "Come on," she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Hold together." For a few agonizing moments, it seemed to work. The vibrations lessened, and the boots regained their grip. Eliza took another step, then another, inching her way upward. She was so focused on her progress that she didn't notice the faint glow beginning to emanate from the surface of the pillar. It started as a soft shimmer, barely visible against the morning light. But it grew brighter with each passing second. Then, without warning, the pillar reacted. A pulse of energy surged through the structure, radiating outward in a shockwave that knocked Eliza off balance. Her boots momentarily lost their grip and she clung desperately to the pillar, her heart pounding. The crowd below gasped, and even Zix's composed expression faltered as he watched the scene unfold. Eliza scrambled to regain control, her fingers working frantically to recalibrate the settings on her gloves. The boots re-engaged, but the damage was done. The magnetic field was now erratic, pulsing in unpredictable waves that made every step a gamble. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to keep moving despite the mounting odds. She managed to climb another 10 meters before the inevitable happened. A particularly strong pulse overloaded the boots, causing them to shut down momentarily. With nothing to anchor her, Eliza slipped. Her body jerked downward, and for a terrifying moment she was free-falling. The safety tether she had attached to her suit snapped taut, jerking her to a halt just a few meters below her last position. The force of the stop knocked the wind out of her, and she dangled helplessly in midair, her boots sparking and her control panel flashing red. She tried to reactivate the system, but the damage was too severe. The boots were offline and she had no choice. Defeated, Eliza activated the manual retrieval system on her tether, which began to lower her slowly to the ground. The crowd watched in silence, their earlier murmurs replaced by a heavy stillness. When her feet finally touched the ground, Eliza collapsed to her knees, exhausted and humiliated. Her suit was scuffed and battered, the once pristine boots now a mess of charred circuits and frayed wires. She was a smart woman. Professor Zix approached her cautiously, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few meters away, studying her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "You came closer than I expected," he admitted, his tone lacking the usual condescension. "But the sky pillars are not so easily conquered." Eliza didn't respond. She was too tired to argue, her mind already racing with thoughts of what had gone wrong and how she could fix it. The climb had ended in failure, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She would return to her lab, analyze the data, and build something better. The sky pillars had thrown their worst at her, and she had survived. That, at least, was a small victory. As Zix turned to leave, Eliza pushed herself to her feet. Her body ached, and her pride was wounded, but her determination remained unshaken. She looked up at the towering sky pillar, its surface still shimmering faintly in the sunlight. It was a formidable adversary, but she was far from finished. The first trial had ended in failure, but it was only the beginning of her journey. The days following her failed attempt were grueling. Eliza Watkins worked tirelessly in her lab, determined to address the flaws in her gravity boots and adapt to the unpredictable energy pulses of the sky pillars. Her failure had been a harsh reminder of the complexity of her challenge, but it had also provided invaluable data. Every vibration, every magnetic fluctuation, every fault in her design had been meticulously recorded by the sensors in her suit. It was a wealth of information, and she was determined to use it to turn her failure into a success. She isolated herself almost entirely, ignoring the curious onlookers and the occasional visits from Professor Zix. Her focus was unshakable as she pored over the data, analyzing the patterns in the magnetic pulses and the energy surges that had overwhelmed her equipment. The sky pillars weren't just magnetic anomalies, they were dynamic, their fields shifting and pulsing in ways that no one had fully understood before. This wasn't a climb she could approach with brute force or a singular solution. She needed to think dynamically, to create something that could adapt in real time. Her breakthroughs came in small increments. First, she redesigned the field generators in her boots, making them more responsive and capable of adjusting to the shifting frequencies of the pillar's magnetic fields. Then, she incorporated a secondary stabilization system into her suit, one that used gyroscopic sensors to help her maintain balance even in the face of sudden surges. Finally, she added a fail-safe mechanism to the boots, ensuring that they could reboot and re-engage almost instantly in the event of an overload. Eliza tested each new feature rigorously, often working late into the night under the faint glow of the twin moons. Her determination was relentless, fueled by the memory of dangling helplessly above the crowd and the quiet, skeptical gaze of Zrix. She was determined not just to prove herself, but to prove that the sky pillars could be conquered. By the time she stood at the base of the pillar once more, nearly a week had passed since her first attempt. The crowd had grown larger this time, word of her determination spreading among the Cytronians and even attracting a few off-world visitors. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and though skepticism still lingered, there was also a palpable sense of curiosity. The humans, after all, were known for their tenacity. Eliza ignored the murmurs and the prying eyes, her focus entirely on the task ahead. She had spent the morning triple-checking her equipment, ensuring that every system was functioning perfectly. Her suit was sleeker now, her boots gleaming with the polish of new components. She felt a surge of confidence as she activated the systems, the familiar hum of the generators reassuring her that she was ready. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and placed her foot on the pillar. The boots engaged instantly, their adaptive systems adjusting to the magnetic field with smooth precision. She tested her balance, shifting her weight and feeling the stabilizers kick in seamlessly. It was a promising start, but she knew better than to let her guard down. The real challenge lay ahead. The first 100 meters passed without incident. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, each step calculated to conserve energy and maintain stability. The boots responded perfectly, their adaptive fields countering the subtle fluctuations in the pillar's magnetic field. Eliza felt a growing sense of optimism as she climbed higher, the ground below shrinking into a blur of color. As she reached the point where her first attempt had failed, she paused briefly to adjust the settings on her gloves. The readings from her sensors indicated that the magnetic pulses were growing stronger, just as they had before, but this time she was prepared. The redesigned boots handled the increased interference with ease, their generators humming steadily as they adapted to the shifting frequencies. The climb grew more challenging as she ascended. The wind was stronger at this height, swirling around her and tugging at her suit. The magnetic pulses became more erratic, their surges sending ripples through her stabilizers. Eliza gritted her teeth, her focus unshakable as she adjusted her movements to counter the forces working against her. Every step felt like a victory, a small triumph against the odds. At around 300 meters, the pillar's surface began to emit a faint glow, just as it had during her first attempt. She recognized it as a warning sign, a precursor to the energy surges that had nearly ended her climb before. This time she was ready. She activated the failsafe mechanism in her boots, which created a temporary buffer against the surges. The glow intensified, and the pillar pulsed with energy, but her boots held firm. The crowd below erupted into cheers, their voices carrying faintly through the wind. Eliza allowed herself a small smile, though she didn't dare let her guard down. She was making progress, but the pillar wasn't done testing her yet. As she climbed higher, the surges became more frequent and more intense. Her failsafe mechanism was pushed to its limits, the generators in her boots working overtime to counter the magnetic interference. Sweat poured down her face, her muscles burning from the effort of maintaining her balance and controlling her movements. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Every step was a battle, but it was a battle she was determined to win. At 500 meters, she reached a small ledge, the first and only break in the otherwise smooth surface of the pillar. She paused to catch her breath, her body trembling from the exertion. The view from this height was breathtaking, the landscape of Zitrion stretching out in all directions, bathed in the golden light of the twin suns. For a moment she allowed herself to take it in, the beauty of the world she was working so hard to conquer. But the climb wasn't over. The summit was still far above her, hidden in the swirling pink clouds that marked the upper atmosphere. Eliza took a deep breath, steadying herself before stepping off the ledge and continuing her ascent. The wind grew stronger, the magnetic surges more erratic, but she pressed on, her determination unshaken. As she climbed higher, she became acutely aware of the weight of her own expectations. This wasn't just a test of her invention, it was a test of her resolve, her ability to adapt and persevere in the face of overwhelming odds. The sky pillars had defeated countless others, but she refused to let them defeat her. The crowd below watched in stunned silence as Eliza disappeared into the clouds, her figure swallowed by the mist. She was now beyond their sight, her climb a solitary journey into the unknown. But even as the world below faded from view, she felt a surge of confidence. She was closer to the summit than she had ever been, and she could feel the weight of her accomplishment growing with every step. Eliza Watkins wasn't just climbing a pillar, she was defying the impossible, and she wasn't about to stop now. The clouds enveloped Eliza Watkins as she climbed higher, obscuring the view below and above. The swirling pink mist was thick and cold, clinging to her suit and dampening the air around her. Her breathing was steady but strained, each inhale a conscious effort as she pushed her body to its limits. The summit was near, she could feel it, though she couldn't yet see it. Her sensors indicated that the magnetic fields were becoming even more chaotic, fluctuating wildly in ways that defied the patterns she had analyzed. The sky pillar wasn't done challenging her. The stabilizers in her boots hummed loudly as they worked overtime to adjust to the erratic fields. Every step felt like a gamble, the forces beneath her feet shifting unpredictably. Her gloves trembled as she clung to the smooth surface, her fingers gripping tightly despite the lack of any physical traction. It was the anti-magnetic technology in her suit that kept her in place, a testament to her ingenuity and perseverance. But the tension held the Earth at bay with a frantic effort, as it shod demanding at the moment. She knew that any misstep could mean disaster, but the thought of giving up never crossed her mind. Eliza's focus was unrelenting. She monitored her suit's systems constantly, her eyes flicking between the control panel on her wrist and the path ahead. The faint glow of the pillar's surface was more intense here, the energy surges more frequent. Her fail-safe mechanisms had held so far, but she could feel the strain in the vibrations coursing through her boots. She whispered words of encouragement to herself, a quiet mantra to keep her going. "You've got this. Just a little further. Keep moving." The wind howled around her, fierce and unrelenting, but it was nothing compared to the magnetic storm raging within the pillar. Her suit's sensors blared warnings, flashing red as the field intensity spiked to levels she hadn't anticipated. Her heart pounded as she adjusted the settings on her boots, recalibrating them to handle the unexpected surge. The strain was immense, but the boots held, their generators humming with renewed power. She let out a shaky breath, her determination unwavering. As she ascended, the clouds began to thin, the pink mist giving way to a brilliant light above. The twin suns of Zitrion shone brightly, their golden rays piercing through the vapor and illuminating the summit. Eliza squinted against the glare, her heart leaping as she caught her first glimpse of the top. It was closer than she had dared to hope, the surface flattening out into a narrow platform that seemed to hover impossibly in the air. The sight filled her with a surge of energy, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She reached the final stretch, her movements deliberate and measured. The wind was calmer here, the magnetic surges less erratic, as though the pillar itself had accepted her determination. Her boots gripped the surface with precision, each step bringing her closer to the summit. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, a mix of anticipation and disbelief. After all the failures, all the setbacks, she was about to achieve what no one else had. When her hand finally grasped the edge of the platform, she paused for a moment, her chest heaving with effort. She pulled herself up slowly, her boots finding purchase on the flat surface. The summit was small, barely large enough for her to stand comfortably, but the view was nothing short of breathtaking. She stood above the clouds, the world of Zitrion stretching out below her in all directions. The golden light of the suns bathed the landscape in a warm glow, the colors more vibrant than anything she had ever seen. Eliza allowed herself a moment to take it all in, her chest swelling with pride. She had done it. She had conquered the sky pillar, the insurmountable challenge that had defeated countless others. Her victory was a testament to human ingenuity, to the power of determination and resilience. She felt a rush of emotions, relief, joy, and an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. From her vantage point, she activated the small drone she had carried with her, releasing it into the air to capture the moment. The drone hovered above the summit, its camera recording the stunning view and the triumphant figure standing atop the pillar. The footage would serve as proof of her achievement, a legacy for those who had doubted her and those who would follow in her footsteps. Back on the ground, the crowd erupted into cheers as the drone's feed was transmitted to the monitors set up at the base of the pillar. The Zytronians who had once scoffed at her efforts now watched in awe and admiration. Even Professor Zix, who stood at the front of the crowd, couldn't hide his astonishment. His expression softened, a hint of respect replacing the skepticism that had marked his earlier interactions with her. And then Eliza took a deep breath, her voice steady as she spoke into her communicator. "This is Eliza Watkins, standing at the summit of the sky pillar. Humanity has proven that no challenge is beyond our reach." Her words carried across the feed, reaching not just the crowd below but also the wider galaxy. She knew that her achievement would inspire others, that it would serve as a reminder of what was possible when determination met innovation. She felt a sense of pride not just for herself, but for humanity as a whole. After a few more moments of reflection, she began her descent, her movements cautious but confident. The climb down was less taxing, the magnetic surges less intense now that she had adapted to their patterns. When her feet finally touched the ground, the crowd surged forward, their cheers deafening. She was immediately surrounded by Zitrionians, their expressions a mix of awe and gratitude. Even Zrix approached her, his tall frame towering over her as he extended a hand. "You have done the impossible, Dr. Watkins," he said, his voice tinged with genuine admiration. "I was wrong to doubt you. You have my deepest respect." Eliza shook his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, Professor Zrix. But this wasn't just about proving you wrong. It was about proving to myself and to everyone that nothing is truly impossible." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Eliza had ever experienced. The Zitronians honored her achievement with a grand ceremony, their traditions blending with her own expressions of gratitude. Messages of congratulations poured in from across the galaxy, her name becoming synonymous with determination and innovation. As she stood among the crowd, the sky pillar looming behind her, Eliza felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. And though the journey had been fraught with challenges, it had also been a testament to the power of persistence and the indomitable human spirit. For Eliza Watkins, this was not just the end of a journey, but the beginning of a legacy. And as the twin suns set over Zitrion, casting the world in hues of gold and crimson, she knew that her climb had been more than a personal triumph. It had been a triumph for all those who dared to dream beyond the limits of what was known.